I think that writing and magic are pretty much synonymous, that most of the effects of one are completely accomplishable by using the other. So, from time to time during this course, I may very well use magical terminology to make a point about writing. This doesn't mean that I'm trying to introduce you to some strange cult or that you'll have to sacrifice any goats or worship any ugly-looking idols. No, what I am trying to say is that there are certain things which are given as advice to magicians, which I would also think would be useful advice for somebody who is aspiring to be a writer. The first of these concepts is the concept of the 4 weapons. Now, these are 4 symbolic tools or weapons that any magician is advised to make sure that they possess a full complement of before commencing their magical career. These are the 4 suits of the tarot deck, which is to say discs or coins or pentacles, swords, cups, and wands. Now, each of these represents one of the 4 classical elements and also represents a human quality, a human ability that is necessary if you wish to be a magician or a writer. Starting from the lowest of these 4 implements, that would be discs or coins or pentacles. They represent the element of earth, which is to say they represent your ability to deal with the material world, the hard physical world that we all exist in. So for a writer, that means, yes, pay attention to your physical circumstances. You don't want to starve in a garret. Many writers have done, but it doesn't sound like a particularly thrilling experience to me. Try and make sure that your material circumstances are at least bearable. Also, try and obtain a knowledge of the physical world. Try and find out how situations work, how people work, how all of these things that make up the material world about us, how they all fit together. Find out about history, find out about physical science, find out about all of these things until you understand the physical world. That will save you an awful lot of embarrassment if you're trying to write a medical drama and you have no idea beyond the fact that if you're poorly, you should perhaps have some medicine. No, try and find out how a hospital works. Try and find out how every facet of the material world works, and you'll be a better writer because of it. Now, the next weapon, in ascending order, is the sword. The sword represents the element of air, which is to say the human quality of intellect. Specifically, the sword is the discriminatory intellect. It's the intellect that has got a sharp cutting edge that enables you to discriminate between a good idea and a bad idea, to discriminate between one thing and another. This will be very, very useful to you in your career as a writer. And also the pursuit of intellect itself, that to expand your intellect will be to expand your capacity to write about things. So that is the importance of the sword. Moving on to the next most important of the 4 magical weapons, that would be the cup. The cup represents the element of water and thus represents human emotion and particularly human compassion. Now, in creating characters, you need to feel compassionate towards them, even if they are the most hateful villain possible. You need to understand them. If you're going to write about them, if you're maybe going to put words in their mouth, you need to understand them as a human being. So the key to that is compassion, to be able to think yourself into somebody else's shoes. This is why, whether to a magician or to a writer, to have the cup and the compassion that it represents continually within reach is an essential thing. The most important of the four weapons is the wand. Now, the wand represents the element of fire. So it represents the human spirit, which is to say, the human will. Now, this is the most important of the four weapons because it is the weapon that should be directing the other three. It is the center of the human self that has an intellect, that has an emotion, that has physical circumstances and is directing all of those things. Now, to a writer, will is the single most important element because if you do not have will, then you might have the best ideas in the world. You might have a wonderful idea for a novel, and you will get perhaps 2 chapters in before you have an even better idea for another story. So you abandon the novel, perhaps you'll get back to it, perhaps you won't, but you move on to your next great idea. You perhaps get a chapter into that. You can very easily, without the application of will, you can end up, after 30 years as a writer, having nothing but a stack of uncompleted manuscripts that you never finished. The important thing about will is if you focus that upon your imagination, you can actually bring things into materialization where they exist in the real world, where the rest of us exist, and where the rest of us can read them. Now, it's obviously a lot easier to say, get in touch with your will, than it is to actually do it. When normal avenues of education were forbidden to me at the age of about 17, I began to realise that I was at something of a disadvantage, and that if I wanted to ever have the career that I'd dreamed of as being a writer and a creative individual who could support themselves, then I was going to have to make an attempt at that at some point. I did. This was around the age of 24, 25. Where I decided that I was going to leave work and live off of the then non-existent mercies of the benefit system until I could actually establish myself as a writer. What I realised was that this was trying to avoid being judged, and it was also foredooming any attempt at being a writer. If you don't finish your work and give it to somebody to appraise, then it will simply never get published. You are kidding yourself. What I realised was that there was nobody who was going to help me become a writer. There was nobody who was trying to prevent me from becoming a writer. It was entirely down to me. Funnily enough, as soon as I'd made that decision, I thought, right, why don't I have a look and see what papers publish comic strips, what papers might be looking for a new comic strip. I sent in a couple of sample episodes to a then current music paper called Sounds, and luckily I received a telegram in reply. We didn't have a phone in those days, telling me that they'd like to start running the strip. This was my first professional work. This enabled me to build the rest of my career upon it, purely by making that decision to take my life and my responsibility for it into my own hands. And I would say that that is not just the secret of being a good writer. So these are the 4 weapons, and I would advise you not to neglect any single one of them.